The biting winter of 1874 had already claimed its hold on the high country of Wyoming, a prelude to the quiet miracle of Christmas. For Josiah Colburn, the solitude of this vast, unforgiving landscape was a balm he applied to wounds too deep and too old to name. The war, a maelstrom that had swallowed his youth and his brother, was nearly a decade gone, but its spectre haunted his every waking moment, a constant companion in the thin, frigid air. The approaching Yuletide, a time of warmth and family, only served to sharpen the edges of his isolation. His cabin, a testament to his self-imposed exile, was a squat, sturdy structure of hewn logs, the gaps chinked with a mixture of mud and moss. It stood defiantly a stone's throw from a frozen creek, its back pressed against a stand of unyielding pines, their branches heavy with the first snows of the season. He had built it with his own 2 hands, a fortress against the clamor of the world and the ghosts of memory. It was a place where Christmas was just another day, marked only by the deepening cold and the silence of the snow-covered wilderness. Josiah was a tall man, honed to a lean strength by the relentless demands of the land. His face, a testament to the harshness of the sun and the lash of the wind, was a roadmap of past hardships, the lines around his stormy grey eyes telling tales of a life lived on the fringes. His hands, calloused and capable, were as adept with an axe as they had once been with a rifle. He had traded the battlefield for the open range, working as a ranch hand for a cattleman whose sprawling property was a half-day's ride away. The arrangement suited him, it provided him with supplies and, more importantly, the right to be left alone. The nearby town of Lander was a raw, boisterous settlement, a place he actively avoided. Its noise and the judging eyes of its inhabitants were a stark reminder of the very world he had sought to escape. He saw in their faces the same blind certainty that had sent boys, his own brother among them, to their deaths in the meat grinder of war. The phantom thunder of cannon fire still echoed in his quietest moments, a grim counterpoint to the howling of the wind. So he clung to his cabin, to the silent communion of the snow-draped landscape and the unsparing majesty of the mountains. That particular December had been exceptionally bitter, its assault relentless. A blizzard had descended upon the high country, a maelstrom of wind and blinding snow that had raged for 2 days, burying the world under a deep, white blanket. The world outside his small haven had been reduced to a roaring, white chaos, a maelstrom that mirrored the turmoil in his own soul. It was in the deceptive quiet of the storm's lull, on Christmas Eve, that he heard it, a sound that shattered the profound silence of the wilderness. It was human. A thin, desperate shriek, swallowed almost immediately by the wind's howl, followed by another, just as faint, just as desperate. Josiah froze, his head cocked, every nerve on high alert. He initially dismissed it as a phantom, another echo from a past filled with the cries of the wounded and dying. But then it came again, fainter this time, but unmistakable. A sound of pure, unadulterated terror. His body moved before his mind had fully consented. He pulled on his heavy coat, a thick layer of wool and worn leather that had seen him through many a harsh winter. He wrapped a scarf around his face, the rough fabric a meager defense against the biting cold, and plunged into the waist-deep snow. The cold was a physical blow, a shock to the system that stole his breath and burned his lungs. The wind, a living, malevolent thing, tore at him, seeking to drive him back into the warmth of his cabin. He fought his way forward, his eyes scanning the vast, white expanse, a sea of unrelenting snow. And then he saw them, a flash of dark fabric and pale skin against the stark white of a snowdrift. Not one figure, but 2, huddled together, their strength clearly failing them. They were 2 fragile anchors in a world of violent, chaotic motion. He did not hesitate. He pushed through the biting wind and the deep, clinging snow, the effort a burning strain on his lungs. As he drew closer, he could see they were identical. 2 young Chinese women, their long, dark hair crusted with ice, their faces pale with the insidious touch of the cold. One had her arm hooked desperately around her sister, a futile attempt to share what little warmth they had left. The other had her eyes closed, her face slack with near unconsciousness. He reached them, gasping for air, his own body protesting the brutal exertion. "Hold on," he yelled, his voice a hoarse shout over the roar of the wind. He saw that one sister's leg was partially buried in the snow, and they were both shivering violently, their bodies racked with uncontrollable tremors. He worked quickly, his numb hands digging away the snow, his fingers clumsy and stiff with the cold. He freed her, but she was limp now, a dead weight in his arms. Using the last of his strength, he pulled them both from the snowdrift and began the brutal, agonizing fight back to the cabin. He half dragged, half carried them through the blizzard's unabated fury, collapsing inside the small cabin, his chest heaving, his body screaming in protest. He rolled onto his side, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and pressed his fingers to their necks. He felt for a pulse, a sign of life in the midst of the storm's fury. He found it, faint and thready, but there. One of them coughed, a racking, painful sound, and her eyelids fluttered open, revealing dark, almond-shaped eyes wide with a primal, instinctual fear. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough and strained. "You are safe," the other sister stirred, her eyes opening as well. They clung to each other, trembling violently, their simple cotton dresses in tatters, offering no protection against the merciless cold. Where are we?" one of them whispered, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "My land," he said, rising to his feet with a groan. "You need to get warm." "My cabin is close." He reached a hand down to help them, an instinctual gesture of kindness. They flinched away from his touch, scrambling backward like a pair of startled deer, their fear palpable. "No," one of them said, her voice shaking but firm. "Do not take us to town, please." Her plea was so filled with a profound and desperate dread that it stopped him cold. "I'm not taking you to town," he said gruffly. "But you'll die of cold out here. The cabin is your only choice." They watched him for a long moment, their dark eyes searching his face, weighing one unknown danger against the certainty of another. Finally, with a barely perceptible nod, they relented. They tried to stand, but their legs, numb and weak from the cold, gave way. Without a word, Josiah scooped one of them into his arms. She was lighter than he had expected, a bird-bone fragility that felt alien against his own solid strength. She went stiff at his touch, her body rigid with fear, but she did not fight him. He carried her to the cabin, the short distance feeling like a mile in the deep, clinging snow. He returned for her sister, a mirror image of the first rescue, and carried her inside as well. He pushed the cabin door open and carried the second woman inside, the warmth of the small space a welcome respite from the biting cold. The one-room cabin was spare and orderly, a reflection of the man who lived there. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a narrow cot was pushed against another, and a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs stood in the center of the room. It was the scent of the place, of wood smoke, coffee, and solitude, that seemed to unnerve them the most. They were an intrusion, an unexpected disruption to the quiet order of his life, and they all knew it. He set the second sister down in the chair closest to the hearth. "Get those wet things off," he ordered, his back already turned as he added more wood to the fire. It was a command born of practicality, not of any desire to see them unclothed. He did not look at them, giving them what little privacy the small room allowed. The silence was thick, broken only by the crackle of the flames and the sound of their chattering teeth. He felt a flash of irritation, a resentment at this unexpected intrusion. He had not asked for this, for 2 half-frozen women with fear in their eyes to disrupt the quiet rhythm of his life. Yet, as he listened to the soft rustle of wet fabric being peeled from skin, a different feeling stirred in him, something akin to curiosity. Who were they? And what were they running from that was worse than a raging blizzard on Christmas Eve? He finally allowed himself to look at them. They were huddled together in his spare blanket, their wet clothes draped over the other chair. Their dark hair was a tangled mess, and bruises were already purpling on their skin, a testament to their ordeal. "My name is Josiah Colburn," he said, breaking the silence, his voice a low rumble. One of them looked up, her dark eyes meeting his for the first time without immediate fear. "I am," she whispered, her voice soft and melodic. Her sister added, "I am Leanne." They sat that way for a long time, sipping the hot, bitter coffee he gave them, the warmth of the mugs a small comfort against the lingering chill. He watched them and saw the way they flinched when a log popped in the fire, the way they huddled closer together at any unexpected sound. They were wound tight with secrets, their fear a palpable presence in the small cabin. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, an awkward tension fell between them. There was only one cot. "You take the bed," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll sleep by the fire," they nodded, their eyes downcast, their gratitude mixed with a lingering apprehension. He laid out his bedroll on the rough plank floor, keeping his back to them, a gesture of respect and a way of creating a small measure of distance between them. He was acutely aware of their every movement, the soft rustle of the blanket as they moved to the cot together. He stared into the dying embers of the fire, willing sleep to come, but his mind was agitated by their presence. The cabin felt smaller, the air charged with a strange, unfamiliar intimacy. He heard one of them move behind him, the soft pad of her bare feet on the wooden floor. Her voice came out of the darkness, a trembling whisper. "Mr. Colburn." He did not move, did not turn. "What is it?" There was a long pause. He could hear the unsteady rhythm of her breathing, a testament to her fear and uncertainty. "Sir," the voice came again, this time it was Leanne's. "Do you want to look at us?" The question hit him like a stray bullet, a stunning and unexpected blow. He remained frozen, his back to them, every muscle in his body tense. Then Anne's voice, even quieter, joined her sister's. "Will you stay if we undress?" In those few, simple words, he heard the echo of 100 transactions he could only imagine. He heard the shame, the resignation, the awful, hollow bartering of women with nothing left to sell but themselves. They were offering him a payment for their rescue, for the food, for the shelter of his cabin. A hot, unfamiliar shame washed over him, mingled with a surge of anger, at them, at the men who had driven them to this desperate point, at a world that could break people down to such a point of utter desperation. He turned his head just enough to see their silhouette in the flickering firelight. They stood together, clutching the blanket, a single, fragile shape in the vast darkness of the cabin. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his body fully away from them, presenting them with nothing but his rigid back. He stared hard into the glowing coals, his jaw clenched, his own inner storm raging as fiercely as the blizzard outside. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "No one is going to bother you here." He did not hear them move for a long time. When they finally did, it was the quiet sound of the cot ropes creaking under their weight, followed by a soft, choked sob that they tried and failed to stifle in the darkness. Josiah Colburn lay on the hard floor, listening to the sound of their weeping and the unabated roar of the blizzard, feeling the first cracks spread across the frozen walls he had built around his heart. The night's raw confession hung in the air between them long after the fire had died, a silent testament to their shared vulnerability. The heavy snow made travel impossible, trapping them in a world no bigger than Josiah's small plot of land. The Christmas day that dawned was not one of celebration, but of quiet survival. The sisters, it turned out, were not women who could abide idleness. They fell into a strange, unspoken rhythm with him, a domesticity that was both comforting and unsettling. They cooked and cleaned with a quiet efficiency, their hands always busy, their movements graceful and precise. They spoke to each other in low, rapid Chinese, a language that was as foreign and mysterious to him as their past. Little by little, in fragmented English, their story emerged, a tale of hardship and exploitation that was all too common in the unforgiving landscape of the American West. Their father had come from across the ocean, lured by the promise of the railroad and the dream of a better life. He had died in a rock slide a month ago, leaving them orphaned and in debt to the cruel camp foreman, a man named Croft. Croft had claimed that their father's debt now belonged to him, along with all his meager possessions, including his daughters. They were property to be collected, a debt to be paid in a currency of shame and degradation. They had packed what little they owned and fled in the dead of night, only to be caught by the raging blizzard. Josiah listened, his face a granite mask, his own past a silent echo to their tale of loss and despair. He knew the kind of men who ran the labor camps, men who thrived on the exploitation of the desperate and the vulnerable. He understood the casual cruelty, the utter lack of law or mercy that governed their world. As they spoke of their fear, he found himself speaking of his own, the words tumbling out of him, a torrent of long-suppressed grief and anger. He told them of the war, of his brother Samuel, who had died of dysentery in a squalid camp in Virginia without ever seeing a real battle. He told them how he'd come back to find his home and his future gone, how he'd come west to lose himself in the vast, empty spaces of the frontier. Their confessions hung between them, a bridge of shared ruin, a connection forged in the crucible of their shared pain. For the first time, Anne and Leanne looked at him not as a savior or a threat, but as a man who understood the language of grief, a man who bore his own invisible scars. Their companionship was a thing of quiet spaces, of unspoken understanding. A language grew between them in the way he left a bucket of fresh water for them by the door each morning, and the way they left a hot cup of coffee for him on the hearth. For the first time since the war, Josiah felt the sharp edges of his solitude begin to soften, the icy grip of his past begin to thaw. Their presence was a low, steady warmth against the persistent chill of his memories. But with this growing comfort came a new and unexpected tension. One afternoon, he came back to the cabin and saw them down at the creek, which had begun to thaw in the weak winter sun. They were washing their long, black hair, the sunlight filtering through the cottonwoods, dappling their skin. It was a simple, innocent act, but watching them, Josiah felt a powerful, visceral jolt of desire, a feeling so sharp and unexpected that he turned away abruptly, his heart hammering in his chest. He was ashamed of the thoughts that had risen so easily, so unbidden. They were survivors he had sworn to protect, not objects of his desire. The outside world intruded on the fourth day. Josiah saw a rider coming from a long way off, a dark figure against the vast, white expanse. A flicker of panic crossed the sisters' faces. "Who is that?" Leanne asked, her voice a frightened whisper. "Just a hand from the ranch," Josiah said, his voice calm and reassuring. "He won't bother you," but as the rider drew closer, his gut tightened. It wasn't one of the ranch hands. It was a stout, hard-faced man he didn't recognize, followed by two others. Croft. The name was a cold stone in his stomach. The sisters saw him too, and all the color drained from their faces. They scrambled back into the cabin like mice darting from a hawk. Croft and his men reined in their horses a few yards from the cabin, their expressions a mixture of arrogance and menace. "Well, well," Croft called out, his eyes sweeping over the small homestead. "Looks like my property has wandered off." He dismounted, his movement slow and deliberate. "I've come for what's mine, Colburn. The girls and the debt they owe me." "They don't owe you anything," Josiah said, his voice dangerously calm. He stood on the porch, a solid, immovable wall. His gun was not drawn, but his hand hovered near its hilt. "Stay out of this, Yankee," one of Croft's men growled. "This is our business." "They are my business now," Josiah replied, his voice low and menacing. Croft spat on the ground and lunged for the cabin door. Josiah moved with the speed of a striking snake. He shoved Croft back with one hand and drew his pistol with the other. But he had underestimated them. The second hired man was already moving, not with a gun, but with a knife. As Josiah turned, the man rushed him, the blade a silver arc in the winter sun. He parried the first thrust, the steel scraping against his gun barrel. He brought the heavy pistol down in a brutal arc, catching the man on the side of the head. The man staggered, but he was tough. He came back, jabbing low. Josiah felt a sudden, white-hot fire in his left side. He grunted as the blade sank into his ribs, a dark, wet stain already spreading across his shirt. And Leanne screamed from inside the cabin. The world seemed to slow down. Leanne saw Josiah stagger, his face contorting in pain. She saw Croft smile, a cruel, triumphant smirk. In that moment, something inside her snapped. The fear, the grief, the years of helplessness, they burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated rage. The heavy iron skillet she'd been cleaning sat on the hearth. Without thinking, she grabbed it. As the man who had stabbed Josiah turned toward the door, Leanne burst out, swinging the skillet with all her might. The heavy cast iron connected with the man's head with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the ground without a sound. Everything froze. Croft and his remaining man stared, stunned, at the small woman holding the skillet, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fire. In that frozen moment, Josiah, despite the searing pain in his side, pushed himself off the wall. He fired his pistol, not at Croft, but at the ground near his feet. The shot kicked up a spray of dirt that made Croft yelp and jump back. Get out of here! Josiah growled, his voice strained but full of menace. And if you ever come back, I'll bury you on this land. Croft looked from Josiah's smoking gun to the unconscious man on the ground and then to the two women standing together on the porch, one with a skillet, the other with eyes blazing with defiance. The odds had changed. He cursed, grabbed the reins of his man's horse, and rode away, leaving his wounded companion in the dust. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and healing. The doctor from Lander, summoned by a ranch hand, declared that the knife had missed anything vital, but had gone deep. Josiah's small cabin became a sickbed, and the world outside was a silent, snow-covered landscape. Time was measured by the changing of bandages and the slow return of color to his face. And Leanne never left his side. They were fierce, tireless guardians of his recovery, their role shifting from rescued to caretakers. In this crucible of vulnerability, the last of their walls crumbled. He was no longer just the strong, silent rescuer, and they were no longer fragile, helpless victims. They were a man and two women, bound by a shared fight for survival. In the long, quiet nights, they would lay beside him on the narrow cot, their warm presence a comfort against the pain and the cold. It was in these dark, quiet hours that his own ghosts came for him. The war, which he had kept locked away for so long, broke free in his fevered dreams. He would cry out in his sleep, his body thrashing, his voice thick with an old, unhealed agony. Samuel, he would shout, the name a raw, open wound. They did not try to wake him. Instead, they would lean close, their voices a lifeline in his sea of memory. You are not there, Josiah, and would whisper, her voice a soft, soothing balm. The war is over, Leanne would add, her hand finding his in the darkness. You are here with us. You are safe, they would describe the room, the pattern of the moonlight on the floor, the weight of the quilt, until the tension left his body, and he would quiet, his hand finding theirs in the darkness. They were calming the ghosts that had haunted his solitude for so long. His physical strength returned slowly. One afternoon, he took his first few shuffling steps to the window, leaning on them for support. They stood there, the three of them, looking out at the now calm and clear landscape. He looked at the women who had nursed him, who had fought for him, who had faced down his demons with nothing but the soft power of their voices. He saw his future standing right there beside him, a future he had never dared to imagine. The thought of a life without them was a cold, empty void. He had nothing to offer them but the simple, profound truth of his heart. This place, he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. It could be your home. If you'll have it. Tears welled in Ann's eyes. Leanne smiled, a fragile, beautiful thing. They were as broken in their own ways as he was, three survivors in a world that had tried to break them. Leanne answered his offer with a question of her own, the same one from that first terrifying night. But now, it was stripped of all its shame and filled with a new, hopeful meaning. Will you stay, Josiah? He did not need to answer. He simply leaned in and kissed Ann, then Leanne, a gentle, tender kiss of acceptance and promise. He was home. They did not stay in the old cabin. Together, the three of them, they built a new home on a rise overlooking the creek, with a porch for watching the sunset. They built it with their own hands, every log a testament to the life they were forging together, a life of shared strength and quiet love. The seasons turned. Their life settled into a peaceful, hard-working rhythm. One late summer afternoon, they rode out together along the creek, the three of them on horseback. As they rode, Ann's hand slipped from her reins and found his. A moment later, Leanne's hand covered both of theirs, a simple, profound gesture of belonging. He looked over at them, at their faces, which were no longer haunted by fear but were instead softened by love and lit by genuine, radiant smiles. And in that moment, he smiled back, a rare, true smile that reached his stormy eyes and erased the last shadows of the war, of the grief, of the solitude. The pain they had all carried had not vanished. The ghosts were still there, but now they rested quietly between the three of them, held in the space of their shared life, no longer a burden to be carried alone.